Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Talking Point over your Pan-African channel. But today we're discussing something in the course of this news, and of course it revolves around the political or say a presidential term limit across the African continent. While Africa has become a key landscape for presidential tenure reform over the past 20 years, with more than 50 attempted or successful changes to a presidential term limit. These attempts by several African leaders to overcome or abrogate the limits sparked or have sparked debates across the continent, yet permitting them to continue their rule. Though some African presidents are creating positive impacts, that is not true for others, as it has resulted in several military takeovers. Term limit evasions are at the root cause of a host of governance misfunctions in Africa and are linked to higher levels of autocracy, corruption, conflict, and the propensity of coups, as earlier on mentioned. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we shall be discussing the politics surrounding presidential term limits across the African continent while posing the question, why the evasions? Thank you for joining us. This is Talking Point. Stay with us. If you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Point over your #1 Pan-African channel. Today we're discussing the politics around the presidential term limits across the African continent, a topic that has sparked debates in recent times across Africa. And of course, we shall be evoking this with a season of panel experts in the course of this edition. Meanwhile, just to reiterate, you're watching us on 4U Television. Meanwhile, you're listening to us on 4U Radio FM 96.3, and we're streaming live on our social media platforms. So with me in the studio this afternoon is FABRICE LENA, who is a politician here in Cameroon, as he doubles as an international diplomat. Greetings to you, FABRICE LENA. You're welcome to today's edition.
Greetings to you, Sharon, and to all the viewers of 4U Media, to all Pan-Africanists, to all my brothers across the continent, to Rogers Kalema in Uganda, to Tashila Lungu in Zambia, to Anita Nesri in Zimbabwe. Greetings the young leadership of Senegal, headed by Bashiru Diomaye Faye and Ousmane Sonko. Courage to Masra Success, the preferred candidates for the Chadian presidential race. Hoping to see you succeed in May 6th. Greetings to all the young people across the African continent that are fighting for change and revolution of the continent that belongs to the youth. Of course, our continent have the greatest population of young people around the world, so we have a big role to play, and I'm just doing my own part of the job. I hope you do your own part of the job too. Thank you.
Exactly.
I'm always glad to have you to be your guest.
It's always a pleasure having you on this edition. Meanwhile, we equally take you to the United States, where we are being joined by Dr. STANLEY, FONGOD, who is a Pan-Africanist. Greetings to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Sharon, and thank my co-panelist, Lena, for also being on this platform, and to those who are joining us from around the world, and especially on the African continent. You know, I'm quite excited to be here, and I hope that we'll have a very productive conversation this afternoon.
We look forward to a productive conversation. So to kickstart with you, FABRICE LENA, you are a politician, like Eliron mentioned, and of course you are the center of the political systems in Cameroon and beyond, like you cited in your preamble. Now, in your opinion, what accounts for this decade-long invasion of presidential limits across Africa?
Yeah, the question of presidential term limit in Africa boils down to the grooming of strong men against strong institutions in the African continent. And this has been a long struggle of politicians that were born in the 70s and in the 80s And by the time they were able to take power, are not willing to share this power with the younger generation. And then this has affected so many African countries. But to globalize this will be to say that all African countries are practicing one and the same thing, which is wrong. There are some African countries that have been able to practice constitutional democracy and respect of presidential term limits. If they were to say countries that have been able to practice presidential term limit, we will talk of Zambia. Zambia is one because the founding father of Zambia with Dr. Kenneth Kaunda was able to accept a defeat in a free and fair election organized in 1991 by himself, and he accepted defeat from Frederick Chiluba and stepped down. And this foundation had been the foundation of Zambia since independence till date. We also have country like Botswana that has been able to also practice this perspective of presidential term limit and respect it according to the constitution. But the only French African country that have seen this also is Mauritius, the Mauritius Island. Mauritius Island is one of the countries in Africa that have been able to practice term limit and respect of term limit of presidents, with President Kailash and President Amina Guri being those who have significantly shaped the country into respect of state institutions and constitutional term limit. Now, you will see that the propensity for French-speaking African countries to respect presidential term limit is very low as compared to English-speaking African countries. So when you want to do a comparative analysis, you will come to realize that the colonial culture of the French prones the leaders to seek to stay in power long and to seek to always thwart the constitution in order to remain in power. This is the case with Chad in 2006 when Idriss Déby had to maneuver the constitution of Chad so he could have a continued renewability of the presidential office. The same thing with Cameroon, my country, in 2008 when a bill was sent to the parliament to remove presidential term limit. And of course, we have seen the consequences of what this has done to the country with the numerous internal conflicts and the Anglophone crisis that is still ongoing, even though it may be underreported, and the series of socio-political problems that Cameroon is facing today. One of the major causes is this removal of presidential term limit in 2008. When we also look at this issue, is the main cause of the civil war in Cote d'Ivoire, in the early 2000s, right up to 2011, between Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara. So in French-speaking African countries, presidential term limit has always been a problem, and it's still a problem till now. Just recently, we are hearing of Togo going down history as one of those countries that want to also tamper with presidential term limit through a bill to the parliament to remove this term limit from the constitution so they can allow the president to renew his mandate for as long as possible. And this is where it's a problem, and this is where we, the African youth, will want to say that it is not the perspective that we are envisaging our continent. We should be able to accept as a continent that everyone as a leader have a time to come to the scene and have the time to go out. You have a time that you are inclining, you have the time of optimum delivery, and you have the time that you will be declining. So politicians in our generation and in those who are in office need to understand this perspective, need to understand these things, that they need to know the time to come in and the time to go out. Because failing to do so is simply manifestation of greed, is simply manifestation of bad faith and leadership of wanting to always feel that God gave the monopoly of leadership or management of institutions to you alone or to your political party, which is not correct. So it's a preoccupation for the continent, but it's also a perspective that we all need to look together as a people to see how we could find solutions to it. Of course, our generation is rising to say, let's correct the mistakes of the past.
Indeed, our generation is actually taking up action. Thank you for that brilliant preamble. Over to you, Dr. FONGOD. Now you listen to co-panelists. In your opinion, What accounts for this evasion of presidential term limits across the African continent?
I think it's more of a multifactorial, thing where we have so many things that has to be in place, and these things are already in place on the African continent, and we have leaders who absolutely will do whatever it takes to remain in power. The reality that we are facing on the ground is this, that you have all institutions that is supposed to literally negate things like this from happening. We have the issues of, a civil society. We have electoral reforms. We have regional corporations, all of which has failed woefully. And most of those who are actually running some of these, blocks by themselves have actually gone ahead, and instituted, no term limits so far as their own countries, respective countries are concerned. My question is not even as a result of whether we need to have longer term limits or shorter term limits or have term limits at all. My question is, when we start talking about the issues of democracy so far as the African context is concerned, we need to be able to make sure that we fully understand that within the African framework. And I'm also asking these questions, should it be that we need to start looking for other alternative forms of governance so far as the African is concerned? Should we look for, a collaboration of other systems of governance with our own African traditional systems? Or should we basically find what is it that work for us? Because the reality is we elect men who comes into office and they will do whatever it takes to stay in office. I think that my co-panelist said it so brilliantly. When you look at a country like France has literally made sure that they have those who will do their beating on the African continent, stay in power. It's either that or they will engineer coups and then they will take whoever was in power out of power. And when that person is basically placed in power, they will do whatever it takes to actually stay in power. So most often at times, it has nothing to do with the person who is in power trying to stay in power, but it's always Western influence as to trying to make sure that whoever is in power in Africa stays in power so that Western, capitalistic countries can actually be able to start harvesting all of our natural resources, with absolutely no recourse for it. So we have to start asking these questions. What works for us? What can we do in the meantime that will basically mitigate this whole entire issue where somebody becomes a pope on the African continent, rather than being a president in the country? Where you have people who basically stay in power for as long as it takes, and absolutely there's nothing anybody can do about it. We have to start asking these questions, and the reality is, so far as Africa is concerned, and so far as our individual countries on the continent of Africa is concerned, especially those countries that have the French-leaning ideology or French-leaning sentiments, or are, even countries that are separated along linguistic, barriers, we are facing tremendous pain, tremendous issues, and we have to do whatever it takes to make sure, that we come into, we have a general consensus as to what works for us as Africans, and also be able to galvanize young people who will literally understand that we can't have 4 decades of, literally hoping that something will change. I think 4 decades is long enough. 4 decades is when boys become men. And sometimes in other quarters, grandfathers, so we have to do something, and we have to do something fast.
Exactly. It's actually time for action. Over to you, FABRICE, LENA. Now you listen to your co-panelists. Back in the days, we saw kingdoms, and we still have powerful kingdoms like the Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana, for instance, that has a king. But we saw this in the past. We saw the system of leadership in the past. Do we say that this system actually still applies to the context, actually, in the 21st century?
I do think that humanity is evolution.
Exactly.
Yeah, humanity is evolution. We have evolved from history, from archaeology, from antiquity to the modern day that we find ourselves today. And we are the product of modernity, of a generation that have its own realities, its own challenges. And of course, we have to say things that reflect those of our contemporary history. All around the world, including Europe and America, none of them came out to be the modern democracy that they are in today. All of them came from somewhere. At one point in time, they were also practicing leadership by kingdom, by some sort of monarchical arrangement. Of course, monarchy still exists in Europe and other part of the world.
That's true.
And in Africa, it is no different. We have the Morocco, that is a constitutional monarchy, you know, and Eswatini and other forms of government exist in Africa as well as other part of the world. My argument here is that for any country that accepts to adopt a form of government, the country should adhere to the constitutional dispositions of such a form of government, which is written by the people, because the people forms the basis of the social contract between the state and the citizens. So the citizens and those that the citizens have decided to surrender some of their rights to form the government have come to an agreement and say, hey, this is the document that is going to direct our actions, is going to control our actions of the way we would deliver public goods to you, the way we would deliver public policies to you, you know. And this should be respected as simple as possible. I am sure that if President Paul Biya had stepped down from presidential office in 2011, we will have less problem in Cameroon today. We will have less problem. That was just a document that people fought hard for in the early 90s to obtain in 1996. The Constitution of 1996, which stipulated that the 7 years presidential mandate had to be renewable just once, you know. And then by 2011, President Paul Biya was supposed to step down from power. And then if he had stepped down from power, Cameroon will have less problem. I'm not sure we'll be having Anglophone crisis. I'm not sure we'll be having the multiple issues that we're having today. No. If Yahya Jammeh in Gambia, when it was time for him to step down and stepped down without making a lot of noise, you know, the Gambian people will not be going to the street to destroy state properties or to cause anarchy before he had to leave power. You know, if in Burkina Faso, you know, with Blaise Compaoré, when he had managed the people for 27 years, because after managing a country for 27 years, there is no way you are going to tell me again that you have not exhausted all strategies, all methods, all skills that you had to in order to manage the people, to step down and then let another person also show what they got. So if these people had stepped down when it is time for them to step down, their country will be stable. So if Botswana today is having the kind of development and governance index or democracy index that is having, which is even more better than some European countries, it's because people like Ian Khama, Seretse Khama, presidents in this country have set the pace, a good pace. If Namibia is able to enjoy what it's enjoying today with relative stability and democracy index, because here we need to make the distinction between a presidential term limit, the politics of presidential term limit, and governance. These are two different things. Yes, because respecting the term limit, it's the first prerequisite to evaluate the public policy delivery of such a president. When you have the pressure to deliver campaign promises to your people within the term limit, then the ability for you to work harder in order that your mandate gets renewed, it's better. And the ability for you to have it in the back of your mind that there's life after presidency also permits you to know that, hey, whatever thing I'm doing while I'm president, I will be held accountable for when I'm no more president. So when people have these concepts in their mind, they inculcate in their mind that there is life after presidency, and I could be held accountable for my actions after presidential office, then they will start acting rightly while they are president. If DR Congo, one of the most populous French-speaking African countries, with the leadership of Mobutu, Joseph Mobutu, and then later on Desiré Laurent and Joseph Kabila, you know. So Joseph Kabila, after taking leadership from his father at the age of 29, and managing this country from 2002 right up to 2018, you see. And then at one point, he said, okay, I have to leave. You get the point? Yeah. But he also had the ability to do otherwise. This is where I come to say the leadership is, first of all, the will of such a person and the intention of such a person. So because when the intention is evil, when the intention is bad, such a person will want to conserve power by every means possible. And this is where it plunged countries to war. This is where it plunged countries to chaos. But when such a person agreed and reconciled his conscience with his own mind, with his own body, with his people, to say, yes, I have been able to deliver. I have made mistakes. I have made my own contribution to my country and to humanity. I have to step down. Then this is the beginning of what we want to see in Africa. It is an evolution. It is a process. Yes, there are some countries that have had rotation of presidents. Their development had not been reflected in such a rotation. It's true. There are others that have not had real rotations. Their development too have not been reflected in that. But it is better to have recycling of different presidents who come and go, and each person during the term office make their own meaningful contribution to the country, than to have a single person who hijacks the country and state institutions for himself and with a group of people for a very long time. Because leadership also at one point gives monotony and boredom. So when someone stays long, people just get dissatisfied because you have stayed long. And then, like I said earlier, people should know when to come to the scene and when to leave the scene. And we need to start looking as Africans how to harmonize the systems of governance in order to reduce the discrepancy between the Anglo-Saxon system of management and the I don't know whether it's Francophone or Franco-Saxon system of management of the countries. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's always good to leave the scene while the applause is still very loud. Now, Dr. FONGOD, you listen to your co-panelists, but with reality, or say with the context on the African continent, we realize that most of the African leaders might have stayed in power for some 18 years or longer, but then what are some of the implications of evading term limits across the African continent with regards to, say, the governance of every country?
I think the issue is that you eventually have a pool of people who are literally marginalized, from the political process. And the reality is that I think a very good example will be looking at the book of somebody like Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell is an African-American economist. I think he is the best of his class. I think probably in his 90s now, late 90s. I don't think that there's any other social commentator in America bigger or better than Thomas Sowell. He does his research very well. He has this book called Intellectuals and Society. The idea is that you have intellectuals, somebody who basically becomes very good at one particular thing. Maybe the guy is a medical doctor, specialized maybe as a cardiologist, or maybe a head surgeon, neurosurgeon, or whatever be the specialty. Maybe be it in science, any other season in science, maybe in economics as himself. But then most of these guys have the tendency to have these unmitigated goal to feel that they know it all. Whenever you have somebody who is in power, and especially this is some of the issues I have, especially with politicians. Politicians, people who have the tendency to know exactly how a government functions, does not necessarily have the skill set to be able to bring a government or to bring a country, out of the economic crisis, for example. You need to fully understand absolutely what is happening. And the unfortunate thing for most people who are in power is that they have this tendency to feel that they absolutely, without them being in power, the nation will plunge into darkness. The reality is there are hundreds of thousands of young people with the skill sets, with the capacity, building, tech companies all around the world, okay? Literally some of the best doctors in the world. For example, you look at a country like Nigeria, Some of the best surgeons in the world are Nigerians, even in the United States of America. I live very close to a particular city called Temecula, California. And right in this particular city, I know of two surgeons that are actually running a hospitals. And both of these surgeons are actually Africans from Nigeria. I know of another medical doctor. This guy is an oncologist. And this guy has a wait time of over 2 years. To see him, you must book up 2 years in advance before you're able to meet this doctor. He is born Nigerian, African. I know of Cameroonians, people like Ma Hobby. These are guys who have come up with great stuff, so far as medicine is concerned. If you've heard about the FOBIMA procedure, you will know this guy is born Cameroonian. All right, there are great men, great women in all of these fields who are doing great things so far as the African continent is concerned. But they're not just doing it in Africa, they are doing it outside of Africa. And the reason why most of these folks are outside of Africa is because we have this whole entire thing on the continent of Africa where greatness is not accepted back home. Why? Because folks who have been in power will do whatever it takes to stay in power, marginalize those who have studied hard and fought hard, especially so far as our systems, our countries are evolving. I think that Lena just said something extremely quite powerful. We are moving from antiquity into the modern age. And the reality is, even though we are moving from antiquity into the modern age, it is not as if to say we are marginalizing and we are saying that our antiquity was not that great. All we are saying is that the world is changing. All right, the world is changing. We are now moving into the technological age, and we need to be able to have countries that actually reflects this in all forms, in all the sectors of our individual countries. And if this is not the case, the reality is that our countries will not just advance. So what do you think of somebody who is basically running the country who absolutely have no idea about the age in which you are living in? What do you say of a president who fully does not even understand the technological age in which we live in, who is making decisions and trying to be able to talk about integration, talk about cybersecurity, talk about issues of, bringing electricity, rural electrification in such a way that is meaningful, and yet they have no idea what they're talking about. Some person sitting beside them write this stuff and hand over to them, and they talk about it, and they absolutely have no idea, no desire, because where they live, you will never hear that lights went out. Do you understand that? I've never heard that in any presidential palace on the African continent, they went for a day without electricity. The idea is this, that we have leaders that absolutely have no idea about the plight of the local man. They have no idea about the pain of the locals. So they are ruling a culture, or they are ruling a nation where they are divorced of the realities of those who are living in the nation. And because we are living in the separate class altogether. And so it doesn't really matter to them exactly what happens in the country, because obviously nothing is going to bother them. They are doing very well at the expense of those who are in the country. And some idiots are also putting these men in power, and at the expense of, of their own lives and livelihood. So people are suffering while those who they put in power are doing extremely very well. That's the reality of the continent. My point is this: I fully understand that there are things that we need to do. I understand that, we need to be able to have men in power that fully understand the plight of the people. But what I'm also asking is this: how do we get to that place where we are actually able to help Africans fully understand that if you're going to be able to put anybody in power, put someone in power, just like Lena says, that understands that whatever they do, it will reflect on them. And after they've left office, they have to also deal with the consequences of the decisions they took while they were in office. I think that there's no other barometer to be able to actually measure someone's success than for that person to leave office and basically be out of office and says, you know what, I am extremely excited and happy because now I'm benefiting from the decisions I took while I was in office. If a leader will rule a nation and will push that nation into the path of prosperity, when that leader leaves office, then that leader will be able to experience exactly whatever their decisions were when they were in office. But if that leader would only leave office because they died like a pope or they died like a king, well, the reality is There will always be divorce from whatever decisions they make, because the consequence of those decisions will never meet them in the first place. They will never leave office. They will die in office. And unfortunately, that's the reality of most of us on the African continent. I hope that that's not our story. I hope that we can actually find a way in which we can bridge ethnic, religious, and linguistic lines, and find ways that we can create some kind of a federal system, especially across most African countries, so that even if the top tier, the presidency is not changing, but we can absolutely start talking about some legitimate change, which is measurable with real reforms, at the federal level, where you have a state government, at local government areas. In places like Cameroon, you'll be talking about provinces or regions. In places like Nigeria, you'll be talking about states like the Delta State and all of that, where you can actually be able to measure progress. And maybe if we can start talking about having some kind of a democratic, platform at that level, that might also be able to help engineer the change that we're looking for, at the top, at the presidential levels.
Thank you immensely, Dr. FONGOD. Speaking of consequences of decisions, we shall be coming back to that. But I would like to pick up from where you stopped, Fabrice LENA. Earlier on, you mentioned that it's important to respect president's short-term limits. You equally cited there is an interrelation between governance as well as president's short-term limits. Now, could you kindly expatiate on that? Because we are at a point where we have leaders on the African continent. We might not be able to say if who has the best interest of the African continent at heart, but everything we do is for the best of the continent. And now, in your capacity as a politician, you get to exchange with numerous experts on a daily basis. What do you think is some of this coexisting relations that harbor between these two?
I will come back to my analysis again. I said that it's important that the current trend of young leaders in the continent voted into office understand that they are carrying aspirations of millions of people.
Yes.
And Africa is one. Africa is one. It is the colonial boundaries that has demarcated places for us that is called country. I am a Chamba man. There are a lot of my brothers in Nigeria, in Taraba State. There are Chamba communities there, just like the Yoruba people in Nigeria. Yeah. The whole of Benin, neighboring Nigerian state, is Yoruba people. The whole of Togo and Ghana are the same people, So we are a continent with commonalities from country to country. And then we harness these commonalities by trying as much as we can within our capacity with the constraints that prevails around the political environment of Africa, taking to cognizance some of the treaties and conventions that our forefathers and former political leaders of our country signed with some other world powers and some international organizations, which is affecting us still today. We have to lead the politics of transparency. Politics of transparency is to explain to the people clearly enough with the simplest language our political agenda and the process through which we want to access power. When these things are explained to the people will wholeheartedly accompany us. And the people will understand if we found ourselves in the moment of difficulty to take double-edged decisions. But when politics is being mystified like it is in some countries, and then leaders deified, and there is no communication between the people and the leaders, and then governance become an issue of mystery, there is disconnection between the people and the leadership. Exactly. And when this happens, the people now start to doubt the politicians. So African politicians have a very bad name. And now this bad name is true and is false. False because we have had people who have genuinely come to serve their people. Thomas Sankara came and said, I have a revolution, a plan for Burkina Faso, and was in the process of execution until someone from within decided to hold him down. Patrice Lumumba had a dream, something to put in front of the people of Congo, and he was dragged down by his own people. John Pombe Magufuli of Tanzania recently in 2020 was executing his promises to the people of Tanzania until he was brought down. These are people that they have track record of the things that they have succeeded to put in front of people. So not all African politicians should be given the bad name. It's just like we always say, give the dog the bad name and hang it. But also, the African population, the young people should take their responsibilities. What are they failing to do? What are they not doing right? Because leaders function to the extent that they have evaluated their citizens, the population, to be those kind that can hold them accountable or not. So when the leader finds out that I have a very weak population, and then such a decision that I take to the interest of my entourage, or maybe some superpower to which I make pleas and stay in power, they will not ask me for anything. They will not call me to accountability. Then they will continue being in power. They are not going to be disturbed. And this is the case with Cameroon. This is the case with Equatorial Guinea. This is the case with Uganda. But when the people rise up to that extent, then there will be the break from the government, and then there will be negotiation. So there is leadership, there is governance, there is politics. Politics is when elections are organized, political parties and politicians have to do the competition. Someone have to leave the cycle of citizens to become the manager of the state. Governance is the time for that person to deliver the public policies, education, transport, technology, agriculture, foreign policy objectives, national defense. Then we evaluate that person's ability to deliver those things. That now is governance, you know. And leadership now is the vision that the person puts in place to accomplish these policies. So leadership now have to do with what kind of practices, values, principles are you putting in place to achieve the agenda that you have sold to the people. So at the leadership style, you can notice that some people use transaction in order to stay in power. Like the case of Cameroon. Cameroon, everything is transaction. You just need to carry out 2 or 3 transactions, and then you find yourself in a leadership position in a country, you know. But other people choose transformation, you know. Kagame chose transformation. He set out the pace, set a vision, and say, okay, I will accomplish this vision in the next 10 years, and then start working towards the vision. A fragmented country coming out from situation of a genocide, and then he says, okay, by 2015 we will be able to have a clean town, we will be able to have basic commodities, and then Rwandese will be able to pay less in terms of house rent, in terms of social costs, in terms of amenities. You know, this is leadership by transformation. You get a point? And some people use leadership by situation. So they just adapt themselves to the situation that presents themselves to them. Like, okay, now I use transaction. The other time I use transformation. These are the kind of people that do not have the vision for a country. My message to Africans is always to be keen to the choice of words of politicians, to track record of activities of politicians, and then to understand, to distinguish between propaganda and reality, ability to put in place the things that they are saying. Because this is how to judge, this is how to know that how did this person manage the political position that he or she was given inside the organization. For example, I am former Secretary General of Popular Action Party. Yes. So it's of course you, Sharon, as a journalist, to go and then go to PAP. How did Fabrice manage the function of position of Secretary General of PAP? Now, what were his functions? Did he meet up to his duties? How did he go? What were the challenges? How did he solve these problems? How did he manage to bring more young people into politics? How many young people were he able to involve in politics, to engage them into civic and political participation? This is what we are talking about. So from there, you can have to say, this guy is qualified to manage a party. This guy is qualified to manage the nation. This guy is qualified to manage a state institution. You get a point. And I have learned a lot from a lot of young people across the continent, like those I've called their names at the beginning of this program in Zambia. It's a country I respect a lot, because this country have a lot of young people who have the ideals of constitutional democracy. They know that there is life after a public office. They know that there is life after presidency. And also Botswana. I respect a lot of young people from this country. South Africa, Senegal, Mauritius Island. But in Central Africa's sub-region, we are doomed. Because I don't know who will inspire who in Equatorial Guinea, in Chad, in Central African Republic, in Cameroon, in Gabon. Who will inspire who? And all the young people from these countries are really struggling with a gerontocratic system that is so difficult to overthrow. And of course, this is why we need to build the bridges with other African sub-regions that are already emancipating, to preach this message, to let those new people coming up to power to understand that there is life after public office, there is life after presidency.
There is life after public office, there is life after leadership, so to say. Now, over to you, Dr. FONGOD. Now you've listened to your co-panelists. I bet you might have a lot to say. But then we've seen the sprout of coups across West Africa and in a bit of Central Africa in recent times. We've seen in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Sudan, Guinea-Conakry inclusive, and a host of other nations that seem to be under a transitional government. With this in mind, when we link it up to a presidential term limit, how can we, in a bit to talk about democratic progress and, so to say, security, how could we link these presidential term limits with this rise in coups across the African continent?
I think everyone is tired, right? So the whole entire continent is tired. I think that the Sahel and the East African bloc just got a whole lot more tired and had a whole lot more capacity and resources on their hands, than the rest of us all. The truth of the matter is that the coups have come as a result of the fact that folks are not just willing to basically accept the status quo. They're looking for change. Young people are looking for change. There are young people who have seen their fathers lived under one system or lived under a president, for over 40 years, and they are saying to themselves, if we basically start thinking and behaving like our fathers, the reality is that maybe in the next 80 years, nothing would have changed. So they are like, they're going to take their lives into their own hands and basically find a way for them to become free. That being said, I also think that, we have to be able to raise a generation of young people that has the capacity to be able to value what is extremely very important and to basically build their GPS system to function and focus towards what is absolutely needful. We have come of age in such a way. For example, if I was going to ask you right now, who is one of the top 10 leaders in Cameroon, you will never hear anybody calls the name of LENA, all right? My co-panelist name will not even show up. I'm not even sure that they will mention him even after 100 because nobody probably will know him. Why? Because he's not an artist. He doesn't sing music. He's not a football player, so nobody really cares. But here we are looking for singers, all right, and looking for football players to become those who would tell us exactly how to be able to fruitfully rule a nation. All right. So the reality is, I'm trying to find out exactly why is it that we are not celebrating those who we supposed to celebrate. There are great men in sciences. We are not celebrating them. We don't even know what their names are. There are few great medical doctors who are leading the world in science and technology. We don't know who they are. There are guys in the arts that are doing great things around the world. We don't know who they are. But for my brothers on the African continent, I mean, it doesn't matter where you come from, whether from Nigeria, Zimbabwe, you're from Uganda, you're from Cameroon. The reality is we are open up to know, we are open up because what we celebrate is exactly who we become. We celebrate artists, we celebrate, songwriters, we celebrate football players. Those are the folks that we absolutely celebrate. And unfortunately, that's the culture in which we are building. And the truth of the matter is that somebody says, I love this, I love politics, I love my country. But the truth of the matter is, if you tell me exactly what you celebrate, don't talk to me about what you celebrate. I will look at what you celebrate and I will tell you exactly what you believe. It is in your celebrations, that the reality about what you love basically emerges. You cannot be talking and then yet what you're celebrating is not congruent with what is it that you're celebrating. You can talk all you want, but the truth of the matter is that your celebration says a whole lot more about you than anything else. If anything was going to happen today, for example, in the country of Cameroon, and somebody says, oh, there's something about Samuel Eto'o. I have nothing against Samuel Eto'o, great guy, great football player. I think that anywhere I've been to around the world and somebody asks me, what's your country of origin? I say I'm from Cameroon. The first thing they tell me is, oh, Roger Miller or Samuel Eto'o. All right. I mean, you can't take that away from them. But I'm asking myself this one single question, that how come is it that we are not also celebrating some of the best that we have? Folks who have the capacity to change the status quo, who has the capacity to take us from where we are to where we ought to be. If you look at the nation of Cameroon, if you look at the countries of Nigeria, especially most countries in sub-Saharan Africa, you will realize that we are not where we're supposed to be. A few countries are emerging, a few countries are doing great, but the majority of these countries are absolutely still in the dark ages. Countries like the DRC is absolutely going through pain and untold. I mean, tremendous hardship that is hell to pay. But those on the African continent, we can get out on the streets and march out on the streets and protest, just some mundane thing, and something happens in Europe, something happens in the Middle East, and the African is on the street protesting. Protesting for what? You have the DRC, all right, that is literally being sponsored in all its, with all the darkness that is occurring on the DRC by one particular company called Apple. Apple is responsible for 90% of the madness that is taking place in the DRC. Apple has the capacity, I'm talking about the Apple company, has the capacity to put this nonsense that is taking place in the DRC, to put it to sleep. But they will not, because financially they will be losing. And the reality is nobody is protesting out on the streets. But here we are lifting up our phones and says, carry an iPhone 14 Pro, 15 Pro Max. As stupid and as dumb as most of us are, we think that's something, worth celebrating. And yet the continent is being plunged into darkness. And there's a lot of money being left on the table, a lot of money to be able to bail our individual countries. And there's nothing we're talking about it because young people do not have the capacity or have refused to be able to choose what they celebrate. I think, if there be anything else that's on my mind so far as the youth are concerned, because these are the folks that have the capacity to be able to take over these systems. I'm talking to one right now that has the capacity to be able to take over these nations and be able to help us basically emerge from where we are. We need to be able to learn what we celebrate. And if we are going to be able to start celebrating the things that are needful, the things that do matter, and basically move away from all these social issues that absolutely have nothing to do with us, and basically build a robust system where we can actually be able to emerge politically, economically on the world stage and compete with the rest of the world, we must be able to choose our celebrations.
Exactly. It's all about the wise decision. Back to you, Fabrice. LENA, I could see your reaction from your co-panelists' contribution. Well, we have been talking about getting African leaders to a point of being accountable for their actions. But nonetheless, with regards to today's topic of discussion, how can this issue of the evasion of presidential term limits be reversed on the African continent in a bid for it to strengthen democracy?
I will say it's a process that will begin with us.
Absolutely.
Every study shows that the African youthful population, those of the age of 18 to 45, makes up 70+% of the total population of the continent. This means we have the capacity to constrain by the percentage of our population those few guys who have decided to hang on to power to better do good constitutions, strengthen institutions, and then leave power in good faith. And the responsibility here is shared. When you are getting to a certain age and then you're not thinking of the generation that is coming, what they call intergeneration dialogue, transfer of power, conversation, whatever name you give it, you're not considering that in your agenda. You have failed like a leader because you have to think about your legacy. What about the legacy? What am I leaving behind? What will people say about my governance? What will people have to say about the few decades that God permit me to be on earth? So as a leader, those are questions you should ask yourself. I like to listen a lot to of some founding fathers and presidents of Africa. So Julius Nyerere would tell you that Tanzania was a deeply divided country with Zanzibar, Tanganyika, and the people of the Great Lake area. And then it was not easy to unite this country, to form the United Republic of Tanzania. So at one point, he had to put aside the colonial doctrine and the English culture to adapt Swahili as the working language of the country, and also adapt the communal lifestyle of self-reliance in order to make the people to feel first Tanzanian before feeling an Englishman. So the population, the young people in this country cooperated with him, and then this foundation was a very good foundation. When Samora Machel laid a very good foundation for Mozambique, after his death, greedy guys came up, and Mozambique had never been able to have such a leader like Eduardo Mondlane or Samora Machel again till date. So our generation have a lot to strengthen, have a lot to put on the right track, have a lot to recorrect and put on the right track. We have a lot of responsibility. And I will agree with my co-panelist, Dr. FONGOD, on the perspective of distraction by young people. There is a lot of distraction, and then young people don't know exactly what matters. If you like, be the greatest artist, be the greatest footballer, be the greatest of all these other sectors. Politics defines human existence. Politics defines whether people will live at peace or at war. Politics makes the umbrella of the functioning of every state, every country, every continent. It's politics. If Africa is unable to measure up with the Western world, it's because our politicians are behaving like babies. So they go around and then they are begging for negotiations and then doing this kind of stuffs here and there, and then not meeting up, not coming up like the giant, like the populous population, like the people with the resources, like the people with the raw materials, like that bourgeois in young people, like that country, that continent with the labor force that the world needs. These are our force of argument. We have the raw materials. It's our force of argument. We have the labor force. It's our force of argument. We have the untapped manpower of Africa. It's our force of argument. We have a virgin continent. It is our force of argument. Other continents have already dilapidated everything they got. So they have to depend on those that still have a lot of stuff like us. in order to survive. But
That's so
when
true.
we have strong force of argument, so why should we go to other people like the weaker power? Why? There is no reason. There is no essence why we should go to others like the weaker power. We have the capacity. It is the will. It is the skills. It is the force of argument. And then it is a team. It is a group that have to look at the continent and say, let's lay a foundation. This starts in the country. This starts in the sub-region. And then it spreads to the continent.
Exactly.
And then we face the external world as a united people, as a people that cannot be conquered again, but are there to function with other people on the basis of mutual respect and mutual cooperation and win-win. So this is the way I look at it. The issue of presidential term limit, it's something that it's within the complete control of Africans. It's within the complete control of politicians. But we need to know the shared responsibility. Let's sensitize ourselves as young people. Let's know what to do. Let's not be the toes for these old guys. Let's not be the one to accompany these old guys to marginalize our fellow young people. Because these people, like my co-panelist said, they don't know the frivolities, the priorities of our generation.
And that was actually what I was
They
about
don't
to
know.
ask. Do you actually think that the youths of the young population are actually aware of the potentials of the continent?
I think they are aware but distracted, So every generation have its pro and cons of things that come around.
Absolutely,
so the
that's true.
internet have come with a lot of advantages of making the world a global village, but at the same time making it difficult for young people to put their mind into mental exercise and say, hey, where are we moving to? Are we still in the ideals of the principles that Marcus Garvey, Webb Du Bois, Nkrumah, and Sendar Senghor and the rest came into Addis Ababa in 1963 with the OAU? Are we still in these ideals? No. So where are we heading to? There is no time. Young people are not thinking anymore. All around is TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. So this is the conversations that interest these young people. But we cannot completely abandon the most important conversation, the political conversation. It's the most important conversation that we have. If not, we're going to produce the best artists, the best footballers, the best entertainers, but our continent will remain politically weak. And we will not go anywhere with this because all these other group of people or sectors are not the one to carry the vision of the continent. It is the politicians. So meanwhile, we focus on sectors, activities, professional activities, our passions. We should not forget to put an eye on politics.
Yeah, everything
play our role
around politics
and be part of the process. Know what is happening. Stay informed, and at least be a militant, a sympathizer, or follow a political organization or a politician. At least it's very important for young people. This is what will make us to establish the rapport de force with existing stubborn political institutions and politicians, and then change the dynamics.
It's all about changing the dynamics. If you just joined us, this is Talking Point, where today we're discussing the politics around a presidential term limits across the African continent. Meanwhile, my guest for today is FABRICE LENA politician and an international diplomat who is joining me here. He's in the studio with me, of course. And we equally have Dr. Stanley FONGOD, who is joining us all the way from the U.S. in his capacity as a Pan-Africanist. Over to you, Dr. FONGOD. Before we quickly wrap up today's edition of the program, now you listened to your co-panelists, but then we've had the role, we've reiterated that the population as well as regional actors do have a key role to play when it comes to interfering or, say, moderating this issue of presidential term limits. Now, at what point do these actors come in?
Look, we have had these actors, for a while now. And the truth of the matter is that they have been absolutely not effective, especially in those countries, that has decided that they're going to, have somebody in power for as long as it takes. one of the most powerful documents to ever leave Rome or to ever leave the Greeks, that the Greeks with the Romans gave us a powerful document, which was actually the Republic by Plato. And I think that from there, we went over into Europe when we started actually having an understanding about governance and, the development of government systems, which was basically a Greek document. And the Western world embraced that and they gave that to us on the African continent. But the idea is that most of what was written, so far as the Republic is concerned, some of those ideas were schematic in nature. Some of those were ideas that were firmly planted in Kemet. Kemet is ancient Egypt, and obviously by those who literally, where we consider civilizations to have started, which is absolutely historically true. The reality is this: when you start thinking about who we are as a people, especially so far as the African continent is concerned, I am thinking that we should actually start finding ways in which we reach out somewhat at the local levels. We have traditional, hierarchical structures on the African continent, which I think will be extremely very useful if we can integrate that so far as our governance is concerned. And if we are not able to do so, then I am still thinking that it will be a little bit quite difficult for us to, reach a level where we can be able to put a lot of pressure on those who are in power to say you need to step aside. If all the local leaders and all the local chiefs and all those who are ruling, different chieftaincy across the whole entire region, for example, Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana, you name it, and if there was going to be a situation where they has to be able to speak up, and if they have to speak up from those particular capacities, I think that it will go a long way to go to make sure, that that piece of document which we have, which is supposed in more ways to be very sacred. I think that in any nation, there is no any other document that is as sacred, okay, as the Constitution. The Constitution is supposed to be a sacred text in any nation that is supposed to be respected just like we respect the scriptures. Just like whether it's be the Quran or it's be the Bible or whatever sacred text that you have, one of the sacred texts that we need to have so far as a nation is concerned is the Constitution. The moment we lose the Constitution, or the moment the Constitution is being challenged, then we now have to be able to look at the judiciary, which is basically where we have our courts to be able to make sure that we enforce what the Constitution is. But what happens in a situation where the courts is in the hands of a political party or a particular system, then you realize that the whole entire nation becomes a banana republic. Reasons being, who is going to hold who accountable for what? The reality is we have so many moving parts, and it is because of that that's where we are today. So we need to first of all start thinking, how do we have a whole entire system, number one, where we legitimately separate, okay, the judiciary system, and they have the legislative, which is basically the House National Assembly, the Congress, where basically put those guys aside and say, you know what, you cannot be colluding, with the presidential palace, you cannot be colluding, with the political, the lawyers, the judges, those who basically, the judiciary, those who basically interpret our laws, which one of the laws or the text that they have to hold in high regards is actually the Constitution. Once we allow all of these three to become one in any system, I don't care exactly which country we are talking about, we are in trouble. That means a president can decide to do whatever they want to do, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. By the time they send out any document to basically, for example, the Congress, the National Assembly, whatever you call it, to say we want to have, a presidential term limit, basically expunge. We don't want that on this document. We just basically want to have no term limits. It's basically just colluding, because those guys are the same people, okay, that are also in bed in, with the judiciary system. We must be able to make sure that we separate these groups so far as a country is concerned. But one of the ways I think that we must be able to do so is to have our local traditional hierarchy structures embedded within our democratic process. If we're able to do so, that would be great. I so much love the fact that if we are also going to, for example, you look at the issues of Cameroon. Can you imagine that the major problems we actually have in Cameroon actually comes across linguistic barriers? It's because one person speaks French, another person speaks English. We have these difficulties, and that's the reality of it. But what happens? Have you ever thought about it? That imagine that we had a language in Cameroon that was neither English nor French, that we were actually speaking some kind of a local language, that we adopted a local language, maybe just how they did with Swahili. And if that was going to be the case, you will realize that 90% of our problems is solved immediately. Because, for example, you see somebody who speaks French look at somebody who does not. For example, a francophone will look at an anglophone and think that the anglophone is completely quite stupid because the francophone or the anglophone does not speak English, vice versa. And meanwhile, the francophone, the anglophone probably will look at the francophone and say, you know what, I don't think you're quite civilized enough because you don't speak English. The idea is we are the same people. We are one people, all right? We are literally one people separated by international boundaries. That means nothing, not of our own making, but Europeans. So I think that we have to be able to come into a place where we now fully begins to think about Africa from an Afrocentric perspective as Africans, and then be careful to make to make sure that we do whatever it takes to embrace us and embrace our own ideas and forget about Western ideas when they do not apply, but embrace African ideas when they do.
Thank you, Dr. FONGOD, for that contribution. Now, to wrap up with you, FABRICE LENA, just in a few seconds, could you say, moving forward, what are your suggestions to the African populace?
Young Africans, let's be, I would say that, dear African youths, let's be united. Let's check on one another. Let's have a common plan of action, a common vision for the continent. And this is a submission to my brothers of the SADC, of the East African Community, of West Africa and Maghreb zone, that the Central Africa sub-region or the CEMAC zone, it's so much behind because of the kind of presidents that we are having. If you look at those who have hung on to power for so long, the Central Africa sub-region seems to have the greatest number of presidents that have hung on to power, from Cameroon to Equatorial Guinea to Chad to Central Africa Republic that has never been stable, and then Gabon that is having a military head of state there. So we have a lot of responsibility. And I do think that if, as young people, we come together under the banner of the African Youth Congress with a continuous conversation of how to deal with our future, we are going to make hay while sun shine. We are one people. Africa is one. And the Ubuntu spirit will take us to a different level of development as a people. This is my message. Let's stay informed and let's be the new revolutionaries. Let's do it differently.
You heard that right, ladies and gentlemen. That was FABRICE LENA, a politician here in Cameroon. And we equally acknowledge Dr. FONGOD for his brilliant interaction or conversation on today's edition of the shows. We appreciate you. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, it's on that note that we shall be saying bye. It's the time for us to close up today's edition of the program. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And to stay in company for numerous programs.